On the morning of April 10, 1912, the richest man in the world was supposed to board the most famous ship ever built. He had a private suite on B-deck, marble bathtub, personal promenade, the works. His luggage was already loaded. And then, at the very last minute, he didn't show up. J.P. Morgan said he was sick, but witnesses saw him healthy and relaxed at a French resort, drinking coffee with his mistress. 18 months later, the Federal Reserve was born. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you look at who died on that ship and who survived, the picture gets a whole lot darker. This is the story they don't teach in school. The Titanic's passenger list read like a Forbes 400 from 1912, but 3 names stand above all the rest, and understanding who they were is the key to understanding everything that came after. First, John Jacob Astor. John Jacob Astor IV, the wealthiest man in America. Adjusted for inflation, his fortune would put him ahead of Elon Musk today. He believed in hard money, gold, property rights, real wealth you could hold in your hand. It was old money power, and he was deeply suspicious of the new financial schemes being cooked up by men like Rockefeller and Morgan. Second, Isidor Straus, owner of Macy's, a titan of American retail, a man with the resources and the platform to shape public opinion on a massive scale. Third, Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a mining empire worth hundreds of millions, independent, influential, and nobody's puppet. Here's the thing. These 3 men collectively represented something dangerous to the banking cartel, an opposition that could actually afford to fight back. If Astor decided to oppose the Federal Reserve, he had enough capital to fund counter newspapers, bribed congressmen, and demolish the public narrative. He wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful enough to stop the whole project in its tracks. All 3 went down with the ship. Morgan wasn't on it, and the Federal Reserve passed the following year. To understand why the Titanic matters, you have to go back to November 1910. A group of America's most powerful bankers, disguised under false names, traveling in private rail cars, slipped away to a remote island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island. They called themselves the First Name Club. No last names, no paper trail. Their goal, to secretly draft legislation that would hand the power to print American money to a private banking cartel forever. What they were designing was the Federal Reserve, a system where private banks, not Congress, not the American people, would control the nation's money supply, set interest rates, and serve as a permanent backstop for Wall Street when things went wrong. But there was a problem. Guys like John Jacob Astor represented the old guard, the sound money crowd that would never agree to a debt-based currency system. To install their monopoly, the cartel needed to eliminate the opposition, not politically, permanently. The timeline: 1910, the plan is drafted. 1912, the opposition vanishes. 1913, the Federal Reserve Act is signed into law. 3 steps: clean, precise, and almost too convenient to be an accident. Captain Edward Smith was the most decorated commander on the North Atlantic. He'd been navigating these waters for decades. The rich and famous trusted him implicitly. He was the Billionaires' captain. He was also, by most accounts, a Morgan man. So, here's what happened on the night of April 14th, 1912. Captain Smith drove the Titanic at full speed, 22 knots, into a known ice field in the dark, with no moon. Ice warnings from nearby ships were received and ignored. The binoculars for the crow's nest lookouts, locked in a cabinet. The key had been left behind in Southampton. When the iceberg struck, Smith's response was described by survivors as almost catatonic, paralyzed. A 40-year veteran of the sea who didn't seem to know what to do, and the lifeboats Morgan's Shipping Trust had lobbied for years to keep lifeboat regulations lax. There weren't nearly enough for everyone on board. When the ship went down, first-class women and children had priority. First-class men, Astor, Guggenheim, Straus, were left behind. Statistically, the survival odds for wealthy men in first class were worse than for anyone except the poor souls locked in steerage. Their deaths were noble. Guggenheim dressed in his finest evening wear and declared he was prepared to go down like a gentleman. Straus refused a lifeboat while any woman remained on board. Astor stood on deck, watching the water rise, cigarette in hand. They died with dignity. Or politically, their deaths were incredibly convenient. We all know the story of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that met a tragic end on its maiden voyage. But what if I told you the ship that sank that night wasn't the Titanic at all? Stick with me, because we're diving deep into one of history's most fascinating conspiracy theories. The theory goes like this. The ship at the bottom of the Atlantic is actually the Titanic sold a sister ship, the Olympic. Why would anyone do this? The answer, supposedly, is a massive insurance scam. The Olympic, you see, had a bit of a troubled past. Before the Titanic set sail, the Olympic was involved in a serious collision with a Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawke. The crash left the Olympic badly damaged, and the subsequent inquiry blamed the Olympic for the incident. This meant the insurance payout wouldn't cover the costly repairs. So, here's where the conspiracy kicks in. The theory claims that the White Star Line, facing financial ruin, hatched a secret plan. They decided to switch the two nearly identical sister ships. The damaged Olympic, now disguised as the brand new Titanic, would be sent on its maiden voyage. The plan, allegedly, was for the ship to have a minor, staged accident, forcing an evacuation and allowing the company to collect the full insurance value on a new ship. The real Titanic, meanwhile, would quietly live out its days disguised as the Olympic. Sounds crazy, right? But proponents of this theory point to some intriguing clues. For one, some survivors reported seeing things that didn't even quite match the known layout of the Titanic but did match the Olympic. There are also claims that last-minute cancellations from high-profile figures like J.P. Morgan, the owner of the White Star Line, were suspicious. Did he know something the other passengers didn't? Then there's the physical evidence, or lack thereof. For decades, theorists have pointed to photographs, claiming to see subtle differences. They argued that the porthole spacing on the wreck more closely resembles the Olympic's original design than the Titanic's, for example. The Olympic had an uneven spacing of portholes on its sea deck promenade, while the Titanic's were evenly spaced. Early photos of the wreck seem to support this, fanning the flames of the conspiracy. However, let's look at what the experts say. When the wreck of the Titanic was finally discovered in 1985, investigators found the ship's construction number, 401, stamped on its propeller. That number unequivocally belongs to the Titanic. The Olympic's number was 400. This single piece of evidence is pretty hard to argue with. Also, many of the supposed differences between the ships have been debunked over the years. The Olympic underwent numerous refits throughout its long service, which explains many of the inconsistencies people point to. As for the sea deck portholes, later, clearer images of the wreck confirmed they were evenly spaced, just as they should be on the Titanic. So, what's the verdict? The story of a deliberate switch is incredibly compelling. It, as a tale of corporate greed and deception on an epic scale, it adds another layer of intrigue to an already dramatic story. But when you look at the hard evidence, like the ship's construction number found on the wreck, the insurance scam theory starts to fall apart. The reality is that the Titanic's sinking was a perfect storm of human error, overconfidence, and bad luck. The switch theory makes for a great story, but the truth, in this case, seems to be exactly what we've always been told. What do you think? Is it a clever corporate conspiracy or just a tragic accident? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. December 22, 1913. Congress is desperate to adjourn for Christmas. Senators from rural states, the ones most suspicious of Wall Street, have already boarded their trains home. The money trust's lobbyists who stayed in Washington pushed the Federal Reserve Act to the floor for an immediate vote. It passes. There's no real debate. No time to rally the opposition, because the leaders of that opposition are at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Congressman Charles Lindbergh, senior father of the famous aviator, stood on the floor and declared, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. The invisible government by the money power will be legalized." No one listened. On December 23, 1913, 2 days before Christmas, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. He smiled for the camera as he held a gold pen. The private banking cartel now controlled the American money supply. Not Congress, not the American people. A private club owned by member banks with the power to print dollars, set interest rates, and bail out Wall Street whenever things went sideways. The creature from Jekyll Island had taken its throne. Since 1913, the US dollar has lost over 97% of its purchasing power. The Fed has funded 2 world wars, bailed out banks in 2008 while millions of Americans lost their homes, and printed trillions of dollars during COVID, money that went, overwhelmingly, to the top. The warnings of Astor and Guggenheim became our reality. Now do I believe Morgan and Rockefeller cold-bloodedly murdered 1,500 people to pass a banking bill? That's for you to decide. What I know is this. The timeline is undeniable. The beneficiaries are undeniable. The structure of the Fed is exactly what was designed in secret on Jekyll Island. And the 3 most powerful opponents of that system died on the same ship, while the man who owned that ship stayed on land. John D. Rockefeller reportedly heard about Morgan's estate after he died $80 million and said, and to think he wasn't even a rich man because Morgan didn't need to own all the money. He just needed to build the machine that controls everyone else's. The Titanic didn't just sink a ship. It sank an entire era of independent American wealth. And from the cold water, the Federal Reserve rose to take its place. The band is still playing. The champagne is still flowing. But the debt wall is ahead. The question is, can you hear the lookouts shouting? Or are you waiting for the captain to tell you you're safe? If this video changed the way you think about money and power, hit like and share it with someone who still trusts the system. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the history they don't teach you in school. And drop in the comments. Do you think the Titanic was an accident? Or was it the opening move in the biggest financial coup of all time? I'll see you in the next one.